Welcome to Eye for Iran. In the aftermath of the 12-day war, a surprising shift is taking shape inside the Islamic Republic. The regime, long rooted in Shia Islam, revolutionary rhetoric, and symbols like the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is now reaching further back, invoking Iran's pre-Islamic past. From Cyrus the Great to the iconography of the Achaemenid Empire, ancient Persian symbols are suddenly front and center in state messaging and propaganda. It's a remarkable turn for a government that once viewed Iran's ancient heritage as a threat to its Islamic identity. So what's behind this embrace of pre-Islamic nationalism, and what does it say for the future of Iran and its people? Is it a political tactic, an ideological evolution, or something else entirely? We're unpacking it all with our panel today. Arash Azizi, historian and author of What Iranians Want, Mehrzad Boroujerdi, founding director of Middle Eastern Studies at Syracuse University, Behnam Ben Taleblu, senior director of the FDD's Iran program, and Jonathan Harounoff, Israel's UN spokesperson and author of Unveiled: Inside Iran's Woman Life Freedom Revolt.
Well, this is the first time I've ever seen in the 46-year history of the Islamic Republic of Iran them care about Sunnis.
It's a very poor argument to say that because you're doing something that the regime is also doing it at the same time, this means that you're just doing the regime's bidding.
I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Thank you so much to our panel, for everyone for being here today on Eye for Iran. Wonderful to have you all. So let's start with this apparent, ideological shift of pre-Islamic glory. Is this deliberate, calculated, or is this part of a broader evolution of ideological regimes in terms of how they stay relevant? Arash, we'll start with you, then Jonathan, Behnam, and Mehrzad, please.
I'm going to try to give a sort of an answer that's not very long because, it could otherwise be like... The Islamic Republic was founded by a diverse coalition, many of whom were openly anti-nationalist, in a way that would have been very much at home in the world of 1960s and 70s. This was a world of radical movements that questioned everything under the sun. So the concept of nationality was definitely at home in a significant part of this coalition, in favor of whether it was a socialist internationalism or Islamist internationalism. As one prominent example, for example, was Mohammad Montazeri, a young sort of cleric who was one of the founders of the revolution, I would say, in a small role, but he had some role, which after 1979, he was a big fan of Muammar Gaddafi's Libya. And his proposal was that Iran and Libya should immediately join up and have a common government. What did it mean to do otherwise? And Ayatollah Khomeini, most importantly, the founder of the Islamic Republic, was very openly anti-nationalistic. He believed that what matters was Islam and interests of Islam, and as he defined it. And at the very best, he was very skeptical of nationalism and centrality of nationalism. At the same time, the coalition also included many nationalists, people who had come historically from a national background, who defined themselves around Iran. What I'll say is this. The Islamic Republic has always been a scene of battle, between different ideas, different sensibilities, around the ideas of nation and ideas that there are supranation. That's just one of those battles. And the Islamic Republic's version of anti-nationalism dies pretty much early in some significant ways. They understand very quickly that Iranians are such a patriotic people that you cannot hope to have some sort of an extremist erasure of nationality. As I think in Soviet Union and other countries where they had these ideas, they all sort of get humbled by the reality of the nation. So any dream that you're going to get rid of Nowruz, the Iranian national holiday, that you're gonna, close down Persepolis and all that. These dreams are gone, but still, the dominant ideologies remain very skeptical of nationalism. But in recent years, I'll sort of sum it up there. In recent years, there is something organic to this process that as the Khomeinist ideology, as different Islamist ideologies in their different forms that undergirds the power of the Islamic Republic, they're entirely bankrupt. They fail to offer an alternative in any real way. They were supposed to offer an alternative to capitalism and socialism, an Islamic new way of life, new Islamic man, if you will. As they entirely fail, and as it becomes clear that the Iranians remain as patriotic as anything, The different movers and shakers in the Islamic Republic have realized that they have to fall back on a version of nationalism, and I think that is an organic process. I would only say that Ayatollah Khamenei himself, he has to fall back on versions of nationalism. After all, he has to do Nowruz every year. He has to give concessions, if you will, to this nationalistic point of view, while also trying to, maintain differences. But at the same time, Khamenei is a genuine revolutionary of the 60s and 70s who genuinely believes in a worldview that in which nation has not that big of a place, and he's kept onto it to a very large degree, to the great detriment, actually, I think, of Iran and its national interests. But he's not alone in the leadership, and others have realized that based on their own developing views, I think so some of it is genuine, and also based on basic pragmatism. They understand it's a very foolish game to try to rule Iran and not be beholden to this Iranian patriotic idea that is so widely held. So I do see the process as organic, but as everything else with politics, by organic this doesn't mean that there's no cynicism involved. Trying to use national symbols to bolster support for your otherwise corrupt and unpopular government is something that is very tempting, and I think other governments have done it too.
So I see you saying this as it's obviously deliberate and calculated, but at the same time you said it's kind of an organic process. So was this bound to happen then, had the 12-day war not occurred? And yes, you've mentioned it's happened in the past, but not to this extent.
No, yes, I think it was already happening. I mean, it was already happening. There are many sort of different... I definitely do think it was bound to happen. This also explains my broader view on this. I believe everything that is happening because of the 12-day war was already there, basically. This has just accelerated it. But, Iran remained a very major reference in Iranian politics. The Iranian nation, surroundings around it. President Ahmadinejad already, so many years ago, he did this thing about Cyrus the Great. He brought the cylinder. It's basic. As I said, the total failure of the Khomeinism and Islamism as a sort of transnational ideology has meant that if there's anything to fall back upon, is version of nationalism. I mean, think about it. For example, let's say you are a military commander in the IRGC, right? People hate you because they associate you with the repression and with the rule of the regime. Well, if you want to put some positive note in your resume, you would say, well, we did defend the country. In the 1980s war with Iraq for 8 years, we defending the country, and the memory of the war itself is very interesting. I think there should be sort of dissertations on this, but the war was fought at the time. A lot of times, a lot of people who fought the war tried to fight it on a transnationalist sort of Islamist ideology, was defending the revolution, but its memory has been defended almost exclusively on national grounds. That's why Islamic Republic in recent years has built shrines for the Jewish martyrs of the Iran-Iraq war, went out of its way to portray it as sort of a national inclusive war in which all Iranians fought to defend their country. So this shift was bound to happen in many ways.
Behnam, what are your thoughts? And then Jonathan and Mehrzad.
Well, I agree with probably two things with Arash and then disagree with the rest. The first is that if we're going to give this issue proper treatment, this is dissertations worth of length of discussion, particularly about proto-Islamism and nationalism in 20th and 21st century Iranian politics across regimes, because they're evolving dynamic elements both within each state and within society. The second thing I would say is that the 12-day war largely accelerated trends both within Iranian society as well as within the governing elite of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as well as within the security doctrine of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as well as within the discourse of security within the Islamic Republic of Iran. Other than that, I would say that you do have selective, incremental embraces of nationalism by otherwise Islamist elite in the Islamic Republic of Iran under the supreme leadership of Ayatollah Khamenei, not necessarily blessed by Khamenei and not necessarily driven by the virtues of nationalism, but indeed brought to you by this cynicism, brought to you by a way to find an edge within Iran's evolving factional politics. For example, when Esfandiar Rahimashai, the former chief of staff of then-President, former Holocaust denier-in-chief Ahmadinejad, embraced Iranian nationalism, it was short-lived. You saw the Islamist overreaction both from the clerical economical establishment as well as from the political establishment to check this force. There's been tons of scholarship and people looking at how whether the increasing discourse on Cyrus the Great or the selective embrace on the discourse of the Persian Gulf or the three islands in the Persian Gulf, occasionally brought about by Iranian leaders, is used to try to stoke Iranian nationalism. And you can still have Iranian nationalism be something that the regime tries to co-opt, but I actually think it's going to be unsuccessful in co-opting this. And I'm going to say unsuccessful in co-opting this because despite these two forces being occasionally in the 20th and 21st century being intermarried and dynamic with one another, you still have this phenomenon where there is an ideological purity of anti-nationalism, particularly anti the pre-Islamic form of nationalism that existed in modern Iran in the 20th century, particularly when it comes to Pahlavi-era state building and modern identity and national politics. And because of that, in my view, the Islamic Republic is an overcorrection. And certainly I think they understand now, or elements within the regime understand that there was an overcorrection. But broadly, I would not say that this is an organic phenomenon. This is, in my view, very much like I think the Israeli Foreign Ministry in some page in Twitter tweeted about, during Muharram ceremonies this year, Iran and a few other kind of nationalistic hymns being chanted. This is, in my view, too little, too late. These are signs that I think some in the regime understand that, the salience of the Islamist discourse is dying. But I actually think that, when we talk about other currents that the 12-day war accelerated, is the evolving discourse of nationalism within the society. Whereas I think you could have a rally around the flag, like you saw in the 1980 to 1988 Iran-Iraq war. You don't necessarily see that phenomenon at all today. And if you do see a rally, it's short-lived and it's not as sticky as normally a foreign-imposed conflict on a territory with a population as nationalistic as Iranians would have. So one, I would say the increasing signs in discourse by the state about nationalism represents an understanding by some elite of when push comes to shove, and only when push comes to shove, will this rhetoric be, and this discourse and this symbology be permitted. And that's why I see it not as organic and not as the state bowing to society, but the state trying to create more political room for itself by co-opting elements of society, by simply changing the discourse of security. Nationalism exists for all hosts of people in Iran. It's really the prism through which nationalism is reflected both in state and in society. And because of so much of the anti-Islamic Republic discourse by the society against the state has been nationalistic, this is not fertile ground, in my view, for the regime or the regime's security apparatus to be able to easily co-opt in a way that some other states with different ideologies might be able to have the military establishment easily or more readily co-opt nationalism and nationalist rhetoric.
Please, Jonathan, and then Mehrzad, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Negar. Thanks for having me on your show, and great to be with you all. I'd like to echo a few of the things that Arash and Behnam said. I agree that this is a pragmatic, last-ditch attempt at producing a sort of rally around the flag effect. I agree that it's probably going to be short-lived because the rationale behind it is impure and pretty obvious. The Islamic Republic has clearly had to pivot in its strategy from projecting images of a strength exhibited by IRGC commanders. They've had to taper that down, and given what we saw with Operation Rising Lion, Operation Midnight Hammer, they've had to replace that with these pre-Islamic imagery, imperial history, that the very kind of imagery that the Islamic Republic for the past 46 years has tried to expunge, tried to minimize, and tried to supplant with this new version of history. So I think expecting them to have a great deal of success would be an insult to the many people inside Iran who can see right through it. And they would point to the decades of speeches in which Khamenei has ridiculed Iran's pre-Islamic history, mocked other expressions of national pride, and sort of distanced itself from that pre-79 history. One particular thing of note that I found particularly interesting was on the July 5th appearance of the Supreme Leader. He appeared for an hour long to take part in a mourning ceremony, and he invited a religious eugelist to sort of perform a patriotic Iranian song as part of the ceremony. and it was, I think, many observers saw right through it, saw that this was an attempt of trying to save face, and I don't expect it to have much success down the line.
Please go ahead, Mehrzad.
So I think this is really the relationship between the Islamic Republic and nationalism, Iranian nationalism, is a rather complicated, a story here that we need to look at. Look, the way I look at it is this way: we had the Pahlavi regime for 54 years, both the Reza Shah and Mohammad Reza Shah promoting this sense of Iranian nationalism, and then the '79 revolution happens, and Ayatollah Khomeini comes to the scene and wants to dismiss nationalism because he views it as divisive, right? And therefore he wants to try to center Iranian identity solely around Islam. And what we see happen is, for example, in the name of the Revolutionary Guards, there is not even a mention of Iran, right? It's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. And so the emphasis is really on the Ummah as the Islamic community rather than the nation. Now, however, I think what has happened is that there were two important developments that are worth considering. One is the impact of the Iran-Iraq war that was already referred to by our colleagues, and that basically meant that the Islamic Republic had to mix Islamic fever with nationalistic messaging, right? The defense of the homeland, etc., during the 8 years of the war. The second issue, which in my view was even more profound, and when you look at in detail at some of the results of massive public opinion surveys that have been done over the last 40 years, basically indicates the following: that whereas the regime has tried to de-emphasize any type of the iconography and symbols of Iranian nationalism, be it monuments, text, and whatever symbols of ancient Persia, for example, that you can find, both in its public discourse and in terms of its educational, policy, etc. They have not succeeded, right? The unease with pre-Islamic traditions like Nowruz, Charshamba Suri, and others have continued, and yet Iranians' infatuation with those symbols or with the Persian hedonistic poetry of the likes of Omar Khayyam continues to this day. So I think it's fair to say that many of these secular nationalistic symbols in the country have survived despite the regime's best efforts to try to either ignore them or make instrumentalist use of it. Furthermore, it's important to keep in mind that the Islamic Republic's attempt to try to export its revolution and support Shiite movements, in Lebanon, Iraq, Bahrain, and other places, I think was seen by many Iranians as sort of disconnected with Iran's national interest. And we saw the manifestation of it in the slogan during the woman life freedom movement, where people were chanting neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life for Iran. uh, Now when I say it's complicated, I mean the following: the Islamic Republic can rightfully claim up to now that it has not lost an inch of Iranian territory, right? During the 4 decades that it has been in power, which cannot be said by many other regimes that came before it. However, it is also equally true that this same regime has got Iran involved in two devastating wars for the country: the Iran-Iraq War and this 12-day conflict with Israel and the United States. My sense is that the calls for national unity somewhat ring hollow under the current circumstances. Frankly, in my view, a political system that is scared of nationalistic iconography is a timid state, no matter how many missiles you may have, with you, etc. So it's important to keep this in mind. But also, let us not lose sight of the fact, right, that despite the animosity toward the state that average citizens have, Iranians, I think, have manifested this fact that they remain nationalistic to the core when the subject of Persian Gulf comes in, when the subject of ethnic separatism in the country comes into play, when the issue of the Caspian Sea and Iran's share of the Caspian Sea came up. So I think we should be careful as commentators, analysts, etc., to see what the state is trying to do, right? Sort of monopolize the discourse, etc., and shape it in the way it likes, and also keep an eye, right, on where the popular sentiment in the country exists. My sense is that what we are seeing more and more is really the ascendancy of that civil society popular sentiment in the country at the expense of the regime and its ideological state apparatuses, and that's really where we are, and that's why I think the picture has become so complicated.
Yeah, and let's stick with that thought, like the implications for Iranian society and for Iran's future, because that's what I'm really interested in. So let's say, hypothetically, that there is some sort of regime change in Iran. Does what the Iranian government, what they're doing right now, does this help lay the groundwork for exiled Prince Reza Pahlavi in terms of invoking this kind of pre-Islamic kingdoms and glory, et cetera, et cetera? Or could we see something more like what Arash was talking about before in terms of evolution, that there would be change from within the regime, kind of like what we saw with Putin as an ex-KGB officer, and have somebody within the regime come out as some sort of ex-IRGC and invoke, take away kind of the Islamism of it and have change from within the regime? Does this help for the regime to evolve itself in a sense? Mehrzad, I'll start with you.
Well, frankly, and my colleagues might disagree with me, but I do not see the Islamic regime on the verge of collapse. I think that's fanciful thinking on the part of many people in the exile community. So I see, frankly, no prospect whatsoever for the crown prince to come back to power and, present himself as the savior of the country. If anything, my sense is that his reputation has been damaged quite a lot, right, by the way he has sided with Israeli state and the bombing campaign that has happened. I don't know what he and his lieutenants are thinking about. Perhaps they thought that help by a foreign state is going to be helpful to them to come to power, etc. And they seem to have put their eggs in that basket. But I think it has backfired, right? I don't think.
So this helped the regime in some ways, in your view? Sorry to interrupt.
Absolutely, I think it helps the regime in that sense. But look, I was referring before to a divorce, right? A divorce process between the regime and the state and the citizenry. That divorce is still going on, right? So therefore, the impact of this type of thing, be it regimes, instrumentalist use of Iranian nationalism, right, or whatever benefit it might have received from the inaction or the poor performance of the opposition, I think it's going to be transitory, right? At the end of the day, I think really what's going to happen is how they come to terms, right, with these realities on the ground. Look, it's not just nationalism. Again, if we broaden the academic lens here, right? It's not just the persistence of nationalistic sentiment. You are also looking at a society that is now more educated, more urban, right, than at any time in its history. These are not negligible facts, right? And I think they have an impact on how the citizenry comes to view itself, right? Look, in a way, my sense is the following, that despite everything that has happened for the last 46 years, and the civil society has been on the defensive, right? It still has managed to survive, right? And therefore, those attachment to not only secular sentiments, right, still exist to this day. Again, let's broaden the perspective, right? You have people's infatuation with the poetry of someone like Forough Farrokhzad, right? A sort of a feminist poet, right? That sort of stands at the opposite to what the Islamic Republic is standing for. And yet, these things have survived. These are some of the paradoxes of the Islamic Republic, right? That secular sentiments can have survived the onslaught of the regime. They have resonated with the citizenry despite being, downgraded in the state discourse, right? The public has come to embrace those themes more so than in the past. This is an important fact for us to keep in mind.
Jonathan, what do you think?
I agree that I think it would be. I disagreed with people who were saying that the regime was on the precipice of immediate, imminent collapse right at the outset of the 12-day war. Or in general, I think we're underestimating the size, the magnitude, the resilience of the Islamic Republic that itself was born out of a revolution and that has for the past 46 years been able to stamp down unrelentingly on any sign of uprising within Iran, whether it was in 1999, 2009, 2017, 18, 19, 2022, and most recently, right before the 12-day war with the nationwide trucker protest. I do think that I would disagree slightly with what my colleagues said, that it's a total impossibility that there would be any regime change, and that could happen if there is a significant coordinated mobilization and leadership inside and Iran and support, not intervention, but support from the outside. But I do agree that we are still a way away, and that's why there should be such a more organized effort in order to counter the threat that the regime poses both internally and externally.
Arash and then Behnam, I'm just curious. So, do you what impact is this having on the Iranian society at large? Then, is it moving people more towards the right, towards the left? Is it helping the regime in any way? Will we see change from within the regime? What impact is this going to have on the future of Iran?
I'll say a couple of things. First of all, it's interesting. As a sort of a academic sort of historical matter, it's interesting. The Islamic Republic has always had, if you look at sort of the official Islamic Republic ideology since the 1990s, it always has included some degree of nationalism. I mean, this shouldn't be forgotten. It was not able to jettison nationalism in that, there's a reason people like Mohammad Montazeri and others that I mentioned, I mean, these are like footnotes by the early 80s. They have not been able to do that, which is why, for example, on the issue of Persian Gulf, they're as nationalistic as anyone, right? They've never given up on that, even in 1 inch. And if you look at the official, if you look at people teaching, let's say, University of Tehran, if you look at the stuff published by the government, I mean, they've included some sort of what they consider Iranian Islamic synthesis. But I think Behnam and Mehrzad Boroujerdi and others are right that this has not always been convincing to the population. Because how can you be such great Iranian nationalists when your entire caste is sort of clerical, when you're defending Shia groups like that, when you're skeptical of Iranians, celebrations like that. Skeptical is effectively illegal to celebrate Charshanbe Suri. It's the government doesn't recognize it openly. So it's sort of a very fascinating case, and it would be very interesting to do a comparative study of this with, say, different communist states in 20th century. I mean, Hungary, the communist Hungary, after all, its biggest achievement was that it worked with the Carter government to bring back the crown of San Stefan, give it back to Hungary. So they all realized, basically, I'm saying something, not to get too academic about it, but it's basically sort of a Huntingtonian thesis that all these revolutionary states realized at some point that it's just foolish, it's shooting yourself in the foot to give up on national claims. Now, as for the future of Iran and others, first of all, look, to be clear here, Reza Pahlavi and others, these are not serious figures. And, you don't need to take my word for it. There's nothing that Mr. Pahlavi has done that, makes it look like it gives him a chance of doing anything like coming to power in Iran. He's never organized a group. He's barely organized a rally outside Iran. So we can talk about him, but the chances of him coming to power in Iran, it's like talking about, I don't know, it's like talking about the chances of the communist revolution in the United States or the Greek monarchy being replaced, or we can talk about hypothetical things, but there's nothing Mr. Pahlavi has done. I mean, the minimum of him being taken seriously as a political figure would be, say, if he organized a group. In fact, the last time he tried to organize a gathering in Munich to declare himself as a transition leader, you can't make this stuff up. The two main monarchist parties failed to support him in that effort, right? So, the question of nationalism and the future of Iran is interesting, but we need to talk about political figures that have shown some relevance. Mr. Pahlavi did so at some point a couple of years ago. In my opinion, it's just totally off. He's politically close to, not entirely irrelevant, but close to irrelevant. Now, when it comes to other political forces in Iran that have some relevance, both those who are inside the regime, those who are a little outside the regime, those who have one foot inside, one foot outside, I think again this is the victory of Iranian patriotism and nationalism. If you, they all know they have to work within the framework of Iran. I mean, the framework of Iran is very key. They understand Iranians care about the future of Iran. If there's any chance, nobody even tries to make arguments based on anything other than that. If you look at it, if you look at the Iran-Israel war, actually, the pro-regime analysts who are talking about it, they make their arguments almost purely on the basis of Iranian national interest. The serious ones, right? There is this sort of a hardliner minority who will say things about this is about Palestinians, or but they're not the mainstay of, if you read sort of the security journals of the Islamic Republic and all that, they're forced to make some sort of argument based on Iran, based on Iranian national interests, based on its based on security interests of Iran. They've effectively been, as I said, because the transnationalist Islamist Khomeini ideology has been such a total defeat, that they know they can't really make sort of they know that would have very little currency amongst the population. But all the other groups, if you look at all the other political sections sort of in Iran, they have to make arguments around Iran and around the future of Iran, about Iran being at the danger of being destroyed by the policies of Khamenei and others. So, in a broad, and I guess your question is also about what will happen in the future. Look, there are many different possibilities, but I think what is very clear is that we are entering, and we have already entered, the post-Khamenei Iran, and I think. Yes, Supreme Leader is still in charge. He's 86 years old. Maybe he'll die next month. Maybe he'll die in a year. Maybe he won't. But it's clear. One thing is clear, and I'll end it there. One thing is absolutely clear. In the year 2019, Ayatollah Khamenei, this genuine, long-time revolutionary, gave a speech on the 40th anniversary of the revolution. Clearly, he was worried about the future of the Islamic Republic. And he said, we need a new generation of young, devout revolutionaries to come and take the reign of the Islamic Republic, continue this dream of Khomeini for this, to continue the Islamic Revolution. That has entirely failed. There is no new generation of devout youth and revolutionary. They exist. They're jokes. They're not serious. They're not going to be the movers and shakers in the future of Iran. So this post-Khamenei Iran will be built by the pressures of civil society, by the pressures of popular movements in Iran, and by different figures inside the regime. Yes, those who are in the security establishment, those who are oligarchs, the second layers, people that we don't know about, and all of whom, virtually all of whom, none of whom has anything but some sort of a national framework. The future of Iran is going to have to be around Iranian national interest, and Khomeinism, transnational Islamism and stuff belong squarely to the past. They have no future in Iran.
So, Arash, what you're saying is that even though Khamenei is still alive, we're in this kind of post-Khamenei era, and this kind of next generation of these regime officials that are taking shape are going to be very pro-nationalist and kind of move away from this Islamism. So you do see change within the regime itself, and this being a representative
Absolutely.
of that.
They'll have no other choice. They can't even do it. They can't, Khamenei.
So force for their own survival is what you mean. Force for their own survival, not necessarily because
everybody in politics is always working for their own survival. But I mean, I don't think it's this genuine. It's the same. We can see it in many other regimes. Like, I don't think Xi Jinping lies when he loves Confucius, right? I don't think he's lying, or in politics it's not so much about lying or true. It's about the Communist Party of China and the Communist Party of Vietnam have realized that if they ought to stay in power, they have to organize themselves around Chinese national interest and Vietnamese national interest and sort of national discourse. So I think it's the same with these guys. I think they'll realize, and I think we're already there, as I said, to a very large degree. If you look at, this would be a great project for, many dissertations. If you look at entire speeches, let's say, given in a year by all, officials of the Islamic Republic today, and how many nationalist references are used, and how many transnational references I've used, right? I think already it might be majority nationalists because they understand. And Khamenei, in very key points in his life, is used that, right? In 2013, for example, he famously said, people should come and vote. If they don't like the regime, they still like their country, right? So that's a sort of instrumental use. But for others, I think they genuinely don't have any devotion anymore to some sort of a Islamism or some sort of a transnational Islamism. I just don't think they're there anymore. I think that there are true believers on that, but they're a bunch of losers, politically speaking. They're like a bunch of weirdos, who are really on the margins of Iranian politics. Who are really on the. This is one of the biggest stories of Iran that is often missed. Is that these hardliners have this paradoxical situation because they seem to be parroting what is official state ideology, but they're not, really serious, strong political figures in Iran. If you look at actual movers and shakers, if you name all of the major ones, they're not these sort of hardliners. They all have had to give concessions, to some sort of a Iranian national framework. And I use the term framework, right? So it's not yes, they're not always talking about Cyrus the Great, but they'll have to talk about the future of Iran, and they know that's the only way they can appeal to people. They're not as stupid. They know that otherwise, like 5% of the population will have any time for some sort of a transnational ideology because they see it as failure and they see it as a result of sort of miseries in their own lives. They basically see it as having brought nothing good to themselves. So they'll have to they'll have to adopt some sort of a national framework.
Behnam, do you agree?
Again, a lot was said. Please remind me if I missed something. I'm just going to try to connect a few different strands, at least things that I can remember off of the top of my head from the very astute and different comments our friends and colleagues have made. One, I would say it's also important at this point in time to talk about nationalisms rather than nationalism. Again, what kinds of nationalism is being articulated by different constituencies, both inside and outside Iran. And the kind of dialectic discourse of, well, what are folks saying outside about Iran influencing the conversation inside about Iran versus inside about outside. So I think we have to pay attention to that discourse, and I think that's an evolving discourse. And that's an evolving discourse that the state is paying attention to, I think, within Iran, and certainly this society. Next, and I don't want to linger too long on this because obviously it's the 800, 900-pound elephant in the room, is the rather toxic situation of the Iranian diaspora. Even, we joke, 4 Iranians, 10 opinions, in one room. I would just say this about the exiled crown prince, is that one reason, benefiting from his last name and all, that I think even with some of the PR post or during the 12-day war, that he hasn't really lost anything. And in fact, I agree with Arash that whatever lens you saw everything in Iran through pre-12-day war, you have the same things on steroids. So if you were pro-Pahlavi then, you're super pro-Pahlavi now. If you were anti-Pahlavi then, you're super anti-Pahlavi now. That exists for some of the dynamics within Iran as well as without Iran. But one reason, I think, for his lingering popularity and why he has a very high price floor, and if politics is about persuasion, it's about bringing your price floor as close up to your price ceiling, I think there are significant challenges. But one of the significant things he benefits from is that he was one of the people who was articulated and remained steadfast on nationalist discourse and making sure nationalism was a terrain, and in general you could say defenders of this old order, or sometimes the diaspora community uses the word developers, tosegara, like talking about some of the more kind of modernist state building achievements of the Pahlavi era in the 20th century. Sometimes this was created as a foil consistently and been able to be articulated consistently. So it's not about creating a political group or a campaign or a lobby firm or a cause. It's about articulating a consistent strand of messaging with, I will admit, has been unfortunately housed them in a lot of other inconsistent strands of messaging, but nonetheless, this part has been a consistent foil and something the Islamic Republic, both in its actions and in its discourse, has not been able to overcome. And that consistent
Behnam, can we
discourse,
have a,
just let me finish one point. That consistent discourse, when married with things like what Professor Boroujerdi and Professor Azizi are saying about the strength of civil society in Iran, will actually yield something if you get, because by the way, when we're talking about change in Iran, there's a lot of different vectors for change. Evolution, devolution, revolution are three totally different things that we have to discuss. And one thing I'm worried about as someone who wants a secular democratic future for the Iranians, because I believe the Iranians have been articulating something like representative government or seeking something like representative government and failing to actually achieve that for well over a century now. And that's a fault of two very different authoritarian systems that have dominated Iran in the 20th and 21st century. One thing I would say is that if you marry now that civil society element with this nationalist discourse, you may actually get something if you get a change at the top and an evolution or a revolution away from the Islamic Republic of Iran rather than a transformation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. So if you get the evolution away from, under whatever vector, under however it's changed, you could actually see something like nationalism not causing irredentism, nationalism not causing predation. The discourse of nationalism today, which, by the way, the Not Gaza, Not Lebanon, My Life Only for Iran slogan, it was repeated, obviously, in Women, Life, Freedom 2022, 2023, but it was one of the slogans that has remained consistent in otherwise inconsistent slogans from the Reform-era protests, 1999 and 2009, then the break, the consistent labor strikes, the consistent, low-level kind of civil society activity, then 2017 to present. And one of the last bridges between that was the nationalist gatherings, actually supported by some of the more pro-Pahlavi factions abroad, that helped midwife this nationalist discourse in the nationwide uprisings we saw 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, then obviously 2021, then obviously again in 2022 you had a 6-day protest before Women, Life, Freedom, and then of course Women, Life, Freedom, was actually the 2015 and 2016 commemorations of this kind of Cyrus the Great Day, this thing which may have seemed artificial and was mocked, but was so heavily stopped by the regime. So one phenomenon I think we may see if we see a change away from the Islamic Republic is that you actually get a representative government in Iran, and we're all agreeing that these competing strands of nationalism, if it is genuinely representative, will have a different effect on not just Iranian power, but how Iranian power is reflected in the Middle East. Whereas traditionally you look at 1500 to the 1900s, nationalism or proto-nationalism or talk about the nation, even within a larger kind of Islamist cause for an aggressive foreign policy by any dynasty in the past half millennia in Iran, is a predatory force, or if it's engaging in foreign adventurism, it's through the lens of irredentism. I actually don't think you're going to get imperial irredentism if you get a nationalist government in Iran that is driven by a change away from the system. So it's very interesting to see how nationalism, which traditionally in the IR lexicon is a driver of conflict, could actually be, in a post-Islamic Republic Iran, a dampener of conflict. Think about Iran come home. When they say, Suriya ro raha kon, fikri be hal ma kon, forget about Syria, think about us. That's a Iran come home. That's a very different discourse than the caricature of nationalism and monarchism and Iran's pre-imperial grandeur that it talks about Iran as a predatory or hegemonic force in the region. That's just an important potential foreign policy dividend brought to you by a change in the discourse at home and abroad.
Yeah, can I if I have a quick retort on the Pahlavi question, because I want to be clear that it's not we can have our little bickerings, but also we're sort of analytically. I'll just point out to two very quick things about Mr. Pahlavi on this question of nationalism. First of all, the reason that I think there are very factual ways to show that he's less popular today than he was before, by the way. If you look at, for example, the support of elites, broadly, when there were cultural, political elites that at some point supported him, gave their names to him, and they just don't do that anymore. It's interesting, again, it could be written about. But I think one of the reasons is that, the problem is when you have political initiative after political initiative after political initiative, at some point someone's going to ask you for some dividends or returns, right? You need to be able to do something about it. Mr. Pahlavi has launched, organization after organization after organization, which result in nothing, right? And so now he's declared himself the transition leader, right? It's a very big step. If you declare yourself transition leader, you got to be able to do something about it. He called during the Israeli strikes on Iranians to come out and protest, and not a single person did. If Ayatollah Khomeini, for example, had, Ayatollah Khomeini, very carefully, he called on people to come out in like October 1978. Had he done it in October and November and December, and there were actually, inconsistent patterns if you look at how much people came out, but somebody always came out. When Mr. Pahlavi says it and nobody comes out, he's going to be ceased to be seen as a serious figure, and I think that's the case. And the second point, I think we only need to contrast Mr. Pahlavi's messages with his mother's, Queen Farah Pahlavi's messages, to see why, in my opinion, I think Professor Boroujerdi pointed to this out, I, as a sort of Iranian left-winger, have a lot of respect for Queen Farah, because in this moment she gave a statement as a national figure and someone who was genuinely, and she didn't condemn Israel, which I think she should have, but she was sad. She showed remorse of her country being attacked in war, of hundreds of fellow Iranians dying. And let me finish. In contrast, Mr. Pahlavi's wife published IDF pictures on the first day of the attack, fully supported Israel in this, and his wife is not just his wife, right? He's a political person next to her. And Mr. Pahlavi himself has not once issued a remorse, didn't publish a picture of of hundreds of Iranian civilians who died. Not to mention,
I certainly can't speak for Mr. Pahlavi, but I want to mention this, because a single Iranian life lost, in a single Iranian non-regime, non-security force official life loss is a tragedy, is condemnable, obviously is deplorable. But I'll tell you this, I've been with this organization now. Let me just say one thing about the life lost. I worked with this organization 13 years, FDD. I've resisted going on social media in my 19 years in DC. Arash, I joined Twitter or X, whatever it's called now, just after Nowruz this March, because the office was like, seriously, you can't keep hiding in plain sight. And obviously, when I saw news of the innocent Iranians, the deceased after the Israeli strikes, one of the first things my natural gut reaction wanted to do was to put up a picture. But then I actually was scrolling through, because as you know, I read more regime media, and this is the stuff that we have to do as analysts, is that I actually saw regime officials, I think it was even the spokesperson for the foreign ministry, quoted by Fars News, telling people to put out the bios and the pictures of those that were killed. And, obviously I'm a first-generation American, born and raised in the States, proud American, but obviously you have like a longing for where you're from and where you wanted to see where your family was from and everything like that. Obviously I wanted to post that, but then I realized, wait a second, I wouldn't want to be doing the dirty work of this regime, which has never cared about the thousands and scores and hundreds of people that it's killed, that now it wants to free ride on the corpses of those that were killed in an accidental strike. So I'm not going to hold the Pahlavi family accountable for tweeting a different picture. So this is I would say a very unfair vector of criticism, particularly given that posting the images and the families, which with respect I saw you and even some of our friends who we have both mutual agreement and mutual disagreement with, when I told them that this is something that the Iranian foreign ministry wanted to do, their jaws dropped and they were remorseful that they did it. That doesn't mean we have to miss the legacy of it. I mean, I'm seeing hardline pro-regime voices, again, because I read hardline press in Iran, that are talking about Sunnis that were in the IRGC that were killed. Well, this is the first time I've ever seen in the 46-year history of the Islamic Republic of Iran them care about Sunnis. And again, all with respect to nationalism, too little, too late by clerical authorities in Iran.
But let me respond something. And Negar, I don't want to.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
This is obviously a very poor argument. Such a poor argument that should be very easy to oppose. Yes, the Islamic Republic also asked people to, for example, put the picture of the Persian Gulf when Trump denied it. I don't have, everybody did it. So just because sometimes you would
there's something different between human life and geography.
Please let me finish. Please let me finish.
I will, but I'm just...
It's a very poor argument to say that because you're doing something that the regime is also doing it at the same time, this means that you're just doing the regime's bidding. In fact,
I did not say that. If you're going to call my argument poor, you should at least understand the argument that I was making. That is not what I was saying.
You said posting the pictures of the... You made, frankly, it's a bit of a, actually, I don't know what's a polite way of using it. You think if I share the picture of this young Iranian poet that
You're
could have
connecting
been
those
me,
dots,
and
Arash.
I had
I'm
known,
not connecting
I am,
those dots.
well, you
I
said
am
I'm
not
doing the.
connecting
You said
those
anyone
dots.
doing so is
I
doing the dirty work of the Iranian foreign ministry. Okay,
is
so I think it's a very poor argument. But let me finish. Let me say this. Mr. Pahlavi himself.
one
Let me
should
tell
know
you
the
when.
argument before
What's one of the
they
most
label it.
respectable things? One of the most respectable things for me that Mr. Pahlavi did a few years ago, that I personally had respect for it and posted it, was when an Iranian IRGC soldiers were killed in terror attacks in southwestern Iran. He posted condolences for it, right? Just like the officials of the Islamic Republic. In fact, if you not saw that it was Pahlavi posting it, even the language used was not that different. Because the whole point of being principled, the whole point of believing in some sort of a national consensus and national interest is that yes, on some matters, we do have a point of broad national agreement. And it is just and this is the last thing I'd say, and I'm sorry from Negar and others also for taking too much time. The last thing I say, this is an analytical point. You and I can have our disagreements. I'm saying analytical point. Analytically, I think when your country is under attack and you're politically useless, you're unable to do anything politically useful, and you're reduced, and your wife, which is someone politically close
What is
to
this
you,
obsession with
is
the wife and the family?
publishing
We
the.
talk about this as not a monarchy, but we're
It's
treating it dynastically. This is very, very,
well,
very contradictory rhetoric.
I'm sorry.
And I've only heard praises, by the way.
In the real world, what your spouse does as a political figure will always matter. If Melania Trump does something, it's gonna reflect on the president.
Yes,
That's
but the
just how it
sins
works.
of the son are not the sins of the father. I actually
Yeah.
won't hold Melania Trump's
Okay.
political
Look,
opinions
you
against
don't
her
let me finish.
when
I'm
I'm
just
judging Donald Trump.
I think analytically, this is in political camp of Mr. Pahlavi is that if he wants, he can issue a statement at some point and says my wife is an extremist and who doesn't represent me, who also doesn't know how to sing Iran, as we found out recently. He can do that, but he hasn't done that.
And
He should get
I'm
distanced from
not
that
going
statement.
to.
Anyways, look, if you keep interrupting me, new things will come up. But my point is, analytically, I think, as Professor Boroujerdi also said, Mr. Pahlavi has lost a huge. I think he had respect as someone who was representing something patriotic. I think someone who, when hundreds of his own citizens, and this is the thing that I couldn't finish, and also hundreds of the soldiers of the armed forces that his grandfather founded, are killed, and he can say nothing about them. He cannot, speak to them. He cannot appear to sort of represent them. And he runs this like quixotic little things. So, I have a QR code. Come and join me. Well, that has to show up in sort. I think basically it's a sorry marriage of two things: politically effectively useless things, and also failure to even come off as some sort of national figure, as even someone like his mother did. So I think this has
Can
not
I
been
add something?
politically. Yes, and I'm done. For the rest of it, I think I spoke too much already. I hope Negar doesn't ban.
Oh no, I appreciate debate and conversation. That this is what it's all about, right? And everyone has their own views, and everyone's been respectful of each other. Jonathan, you'd like to chime in? Please go ahead.
Just one very brief thing. I won't. There are other people here, but I don't agree that Mr. Exile Crown Prince doesn't have any sway at all. But the thing that I'm struggling to grapple with is if he doesn't have any influence at all inside Iran, Arash, why is there such a need and want for him to put out these statements? If he has no impact at all, anything he says, any QR code he puts out, then what is the point in him, according to, in your perspective, issuing any statement? What sort of impact is that going to have?
Negar brought him up. I wouldn't have brought him up even. It's like if people ask about him, I'll respond. I'll talk to him. I think if we can give a number into his political relevance from 1 to 100, I think last year it was sort of getting double digits, maybe like at 10, like out of 100, and I think now it's 3 or 4. No, I don't think it really matters if he publishes a statement or not. If he wanted to build up himself politically, one of the things he could have done is to show his independence and shown some initiatives so his numbers would rise up. But look, for the very simple reason, your number will not rise up. Just like anybody, if you run in the Democratic primaries once, right, and you don't do so well, you can be a relevant political figure. But if you run in Democratic primaries every 4 years and you say I'm going to win and all that, and nothing happens, and then you're going to be politically irrelevant. So the same thing. The guy says I'm the transitional leader of the country, right? The guy called, like, this is a test of politics. You say, okay, Israel has attacked my compatriots, come out and bring down the regime. And nobody comes out. He has not even able to organize a demonstration outside Iran. So you become politically irrelevant. Again, that's just what I think. History can prove me wrong.
Mehrzad, please, I know you want to say something. Go ahead. Yeah.
No worries. Look, in the previous section, I was making the argument that sociology is more important than ideology, and we are seeing that fact in Iran day in and day out. Right? It's the realities on the ground that should be the basis of our analysis, and not really the echo chambers of what's happening in expat media, where someone can have the appearance of being more significant than who they are. My sense here is the following. Look, the fact of the matter is that the Iranian opposition is polarized, right? In many ways, we are witnessing still to this day, 46 years after the revolution, a dialogue of the deaf. The various sides are not listening to one another, let alone being able to agree, right? To have someone as the undisputed leader. Granted, Mr. Pahlavi has more of a name recognition of than anybody else in the opposition, just because of who he is and who his father and grandfather have been. Nobody, I don't think, is contesting that. The fact of the matter that I want to emphasize is the following: Iranian politics is one where you need to have organizational muscle on the ground, right, to be able to move the needle, to bring about change. He does not seem to have, up to this moment, any type of organizational muscle. As Arash was pointing out, all these references, calls for advocacy for people to come out, fell on deaf ears. Again, if I was one of his political advisors, I would have said, "What are you smoking? You're asking for people to come out during a period of bombardments, right? People were fleeing Tehran to go to the north, to be away from the war scene, theater of operation. That was not a sentiment for people to come out on the street. And again, one can talk about all sorts of mistakes in the past, right? After all, any political leader is going to be making those things, and nobody has a monopoly over foolishness and attempts that have not really panned out. Think of Mujahideen Khalq, right? Who decided right after the end of the Iran-Iraq war that they wanted to invade Iran, thinking that they are going to be, facing with open arms by the citizenry. And we saw what happened there. So I think, beyond the propaganda of this political personality and this political party, etc., I think, it will be, instructive for us to really keep our eyes, right, on the facts on the ground. Ask ourselves the tough questions of, okay, who has not the microphone, but who has the organizational muscle, right? What are the manifestations of that organizational muscle? What is your track record in bringing about consensus, on winning over former adversaries, right? So that you can appear as a leader who has that political capital to be able to, sort of, if not universally, but at least be respected by a great deal of the, Iranian citizen. Frankly, I don't see that, right? And again, I think there is a lot of food for thought. Look, in my assessment, Iranians tend to be quite emotional, right? You can see it in the postings in social media, right? The volume of uh, uh, harsh words, right, that are being exchanged right now, just because they might not like a thing or two that you have said, they're easily we resort to this type of sort of emotional type arguments. Again, as analysts, right, we need to treat all of that with a grain of salt, right? This, to me, this doesn't necessarily indicate where people really stand, because people calm down after a while, right? They go back to their previous type of positions. Again, all the reason why sociology is more important than ideology in this sense. Let me end by this note, right? Remember, it was just last year that the Islamic Republic made a big fuss about a new revolutionary song that they had created, right? Greeting
Family.
the commander, right? All right. Now ask yourself, what happened to that from last year to now that they have to now go and change the lyrics on a popular nationalistic song, right? To try to Islamicize it, because it seems like that the previous message, that previous, real lyrics, etc., really did not resonate with the public, right? That's again, I think, further theoretical ammunition, right, for those of us who like to ask these sort of, I think, tougher questions of organizational muscle, importance of sociology, the strength of the civil society. Are you able to win over opposition or not? Right? Look, the motion, right? Motion can be a lot of noise. We all know that as social scientists, right? Let's not confuse motion, right? Noise with motion, and reality of what's happening on the ground. I think those are important facts to consider.
And I just have one last or two last concluding questions. And so much came out of our conversation today about this pre-Islamic glory nationalism. If you could each just summarize in just one sentence, what this says about the future of Iran. And I'm also curious if you could add as well to that, would neighboring Arab countries, do they care about any of this, like Persian nationalism? Does it even matter to them? Mehrzad, we'll start with you, then Jonathan, Arash, and Behnam will end with you, please. And then just very brief.
I think the future of Iran, right, needs to have a rapprochement between different perspectives that are all facts on the ground, and we cannot wish them away. In Iran, there are at least three important camps, ideological camps, right? There is the pre-Islamic Iranian sense of nationalism. There is the Islamic, lineage, and there is, of course, everything that we have borrowed from Western modernity. Any attempt in Iran's history to eliminate any of these three elements has failed and is bound to fail again and again. These three elements will be there, whether I like it as a secular person or not. Right? I think that's my sense. You ask Iranians, who are the most seminal figures in your entire history, right? Two names come up: Cyrus the Great and Ferdowsi as the national poet. Everybody else, right, is just a shadow under these two names. It's a fact, right? These are historical facts, and I think that will not change in the foreseeable future. Our neighboring Arab states, of course, do not have any sympathy or should have any sympathy for the sense of Persian nationalism. But for Iran, we need to look at the architecture, right, of what makes up the popular psyche, and in my humble opinion, it's these three elements.
Oh yeah, please, Jonathan, go ahead. Then Arash and Behnam, just go for it.
Sure. So in a sentence or two, this is clearly a regime that has taken for granted the very rich culture and civilization that the people of Iran have for the past 46 years. And now that the regime has its back against the wall, been defeated, weakened militarily by Israel, by the United States, you see a very clear attempt not to lose the people of Iran, and a very hollow attempt at sort of rallying them around the flag. But sooner rather than later, here's the people of Iran should not, are going to see through this, and the regime's true intentions will show.
I think what we've really seen in many ways is the victory of Iran, i.e. it's quite clear, it's quite humbling actually, to see that what ideologies will come and go. Iran as a lasting national identity, sort of perplexing national identity, so beautifully intricate and complex, somehow keeping together many differences, while also allowing for the differences to exist. somehow part of its region, a 99% Muslim country, but somehow entirely distinct. I think it's quite clear that no matter what happens in politics, that will remain. Uh, the memory of not just Cyrus the Great, but Shapur the Great, whose picture is now being put there, Arash the Archer as a national hero. And if I say, I'm named after Arash the Archer, some nationalists, sort of monarchists, like to make fun of this. It's like, oh, you should be called Abdul Reza because or whatever. But it's very interesting. I'm named after Arash the Archer, yes, because of the ancient Persian hero, but also the reason my parents named me after that is a poem by the communist, Siavash Kasrai poet, who composed the poem while he was, between his exiles in Moscow and Afghanistan and entirely communist world, and yet his heart beat for Iran and this Iranian national idea. I think that tells you everything. That across the Iranian political spectrum, I love what Professor Boroujerdi said, that it all boils down to Cyrus the Great and Ferdowsi. We'll have differences as Iranians about about what is the content of our politics, and what is the content of our national identity, what really is the relationship of Islam to it, but Iran as this overarching idea will continue to remain and will continue to be central to politics in a way that, mind you, it's not the same across much of this region. Like, it's not true for many of our neighboring countries and all that. So it's in this way, I think what we've seen is a sort of victory and a permanence. Nothing is permanent, I would say, as a historian, but essentially endurance of the concept of Iran, which has humbled everything else before it in many ways.
There's a lot that could be said, but just to crescendo off of the very beautiful comments everyone has made, you can end with just Payande Iran. It exactly encapsulates the sentiment made by Professor Boroujerdi, Jonathan, and Professor Azizi. That across all of the differences, that is the through line. That is the least common denominator. And I guess all of us looking or working in or trying to influence or discuss or shed light on or write about politics or foreign policy or something political, or the politics of Iranian sociology, or the politics of the diaspora, or the politics of Iranian foreign policy, or the politics of Iran in the West, I think we have to keep that through line in mind. And certainly the one thing I think that may be able to unite all of us is that we hope that one day Iranians have a government that lets them articulate these different competing visions and have peaceful means of conflict resolution about those visions, and that brings honor to every single Iranian and Iranian-born and Iranian ancestral person, wherever they are, be it in Iran proper or abroad. That is the through line. That is why I think we're all kind of in this to win it, as it were. Not as an activist, but just, again, as an analyst and someone born and raised in the States and watching and looking very interestedly at what is being said and what is being done. You mentioned again, Negar, the foreign policy element of Iran's neighborhood. And again, I will end with what I mentioned earlier, which is if you really do get this conversation now married together about civil society and Iranians' quest for representative government, married with the non-irredentist, newfound nature of Iranian nationalism, that could be a force for the region to embrace nationalism in a very positive way. Imagine a Middle East where Iran and Saudi Arabia race each other, not to sell oil or export extremism, but to build better societies, to be more integrated. That is fundamentally what a more productive nationalism can do. And I think we have to remember that, as Professor Boroujerdi mentioned, that P word, the paradox within the Islamic Republic, which has been Islamist but tried to co-opt this nationalist rhetoric, but the sociology has shown, the society has shown that nationalism has been this foil, and it's been this consistent foil for so long. It began with the society not being willing to shed that because of that through line that Arash mentioned. So thanks for the opportunity, and it was a very fruitful and enlightening discussion.
It really was. So in the end, everyone agrees that nationalism is for the people and by the people, and something that benefits the people of Iran no matter what.
Payande Iran. As a classic Iranian crowd, we could at least agree on this, all of us.
Well, thank you so much. We'll end on a very positive and hopeful note. And I thank all of you, and I appreciate all the diverse views. Thank you very much. If you like this episode, hit the like button. Also, leave us a comment. We'd love to know what you think. You can also visit our English website, iranintl.com/en, and you can sign up for our weekly briefing newsletter at iranintl.com/newsletter. We deliver what you need to know with top stories, key analysis, and exclusive reports direct to your inbox.